So, Richard, please take over and tell us a story of the journey.
Well, thank you, Vladimir. Nice to meet everybody. Nice to be back again 4 years later for Nano Explorations. Vladimir is correct. I'm no longer at MIT, so I gave my talk in 2020. I graduated in 2021 and have been with Active Surfaces now for about 2 years. So my current role is in being one of the operational co-founders and chief technology officer. My co-founder, Shiv Bhakta, is also an MIT grad in the MBA MS program. He comes from US DOE, Department of Energy. Both of us have some VC experiential background. Just maybe a month ago or so, we closed a pre-seed round. So we're a very early stage company. We're at about 8 people now full-time, 15 if you include all of our part-time staff, and we're really excited about kind of what the future holds with us and our growth. Publicly, we're known pretty much as a solar company. That's what I gave my talk on in 2020. But the reality is that we're actually a printed electronics company. We do a few different things that have come out of MIT, most notably the thin film flexible solar cells that have hit MIT News, but also some piezoelectric and MEMS work that we do mostly in partnerships with other companies. Now, why is this? The reality is, just like PVD, CVD, and other things that kind of the MIT.nano community would be working on, printed electronics are also a platform technology. So if you can dissolve it in an ink and you can put it into kind of a slot die head, you can print different materials and semiconductor systems and ultimately provide value for different sort of end use cases. But we mostly work on energy today, and so I'll give a little bit of background on kind of like why. Solar, of course, everybody sort of knows this, but we've installed a lot. It's a relatively large market operationally. Since its kind of beginning of growth in the 50s in the space race, humanity has collectively installed about 1 terawatt in terms of 2023, but to fully decarbonize, we need about 20 terawatts. And that's just a low capacity projection. The reality is probably it will need to be closer to 30 to 50 terawatts to account for things like electrification and other directionalities. That's a lot of solar, and that's a lot of land. Most of the time we kind of put these in fields, but the better way to do it is to put it in places where we've already built. The challenge, though, is that it's very expensive. It's about $3 a watt to put solar on a rooftop. Only about 10% of that ends up being the actual electronics. And the rest of it is really just installation and structural labor. And it's all really kind of pinheld by silicon, which is the core technology in about 98% of the market today. It's really heavy, and because of kind of its brittle nature as a wafer ceramic, it has to be encased in at least 3 millimeters of glass surrounded by aluminum to prevent damage. This makes each individual panel about 60 pounds. You put this on a building, that's a lot of weight. With the form factor sizes and kind of the limitations of 4-inch wafers, which is what solar started on, and then going to 6-inch wafers, form factors have not changed, meaning that labor teams and deployment is unoptimized. And the reality is this kind of limits where you can put them. And again, we mostly put these in fields. In the commercial market, which is where we as a company kind of pursue, only about 3% of rooftops actually have solar. But the reality is, due to these constraints, only about 30% of buildings can actually be accessed. And this limitation is not a theoretical number. It's actually being hit in places like Japan and Singapore, which do have kind of maxed out penetrations around the 30% mark. In the US alone, this leaves about 20 gigawatts of opportunity just on commercial buildings. So that's not even like households, that's not even all the solar we would ever need. And our approach is really to kind of solve this problem with something that's lightweight, integratable, deployable, and much easier to install. But my talk is not on the technology of active surfaces today and kind of what we're pursuing, but kind of where I started. So my talk about 4 years ago was on manufacturing large area perovskites. And I'm not going to go through the whole talk. It was midway through my PhD. But just to give you a little background, perovskites are these really interesting absorbers for the solar market. They're very interesting material science compounds, lots of opportunity in terms of different things you can discover. But my work at MIT was all on around the hidden challenges of manufacturing. So toxicity that goes into kind of printing these things, how we go and make new ink systems that can actually deploy these at relatively cost-efficient ways. And then some of the other hidden things that need to go into final module manufacturing, like EPA limitations around toxicity and the use of lead, and kind of the work that we were doing in solving it. Active surfaces did spin out of this, and I could tell kind of the whole story, but it's very long. The reality, I gave the talk in 2020. I ended up giving my defense also over Zoom on kind of the final results of what this accomplished, which was really kind of high production speeds and high efficiencies in the range of like 20%. I did that mid-2021. Active Surfaces was founded July 11th, 2022. I would meet Shiv, my co-founder, just a few months after that in the fall semester of 2023. And then we'd go on and start actually generating kind of the motivation that most people see us publicly. Our first public pitch competition was the Harvard Climate Symposium that same year. Shiv pitched at the MIT 100K pitch. And then that really propelled us into real spinning out of MIT, which for us started at Greentown Labs. And I'm currently sitting in our new office in Woburn, Massachusetts. Through that timeline, we've gone through pretty much 3 eras. Formation, where it was really just me, and I was trying to paper the company and find a direction, to meeting Shiv, going from 2 people, and then eventually to our first 2 interns, where we're trying to generate excitement, define ourselves, define what the company was going to establish, define what we were going to try to pursue. And then to today, having closed the pre-seed of around 5.5 million, growing out the team, building our new lab space, and really trying to get to something commercial. And so I thought an interesting and fun thing to do is to actually tell 3 stories from these 3 stages of active surfaces and kind of my takeaways and reflections. So the first one, which is not that fun of a story, but one that's interesting nonetheless. In the very early days, I got kicked out of I-Corps, and then got immediately backstabbed by a friend. And so context here is relatively important. Again, it was just me in the company. I had graduated at this time. I came off of an internship in VC, and we had kind of this early inkling that there was something interesting with regards to my PhD work and others to kind of form it into a startup and pursue something valuable. But in the deep tech world, it's really hard to know exactly where you need to go commercially. And so a lot of those early questions were kind of where to start, how to start, what do we pursue, and why. And so I was trying to find the direction for the company. At that point, we were called Veneer, which I think is a funny story. I did the Engine Blueprints program and then the NSF I-Corps right after that. And at the same time, because it was just me, it was a lot of burden in terms of the work, in terms of spinning out what the company was actually going to be and really papering everything. So a lot of things were going on, nothing was really solidified. And what ended up happening is I did I-Corps largely because at the time we thought acoustics was more interesting to start with first. And if you've ever done I-Corps, you know that it's an interview numbers game. So you have about 3 weeks, I think you have to hit something like 50 interviews on customer discovery. You report back, they critique you on kind of how well you did. About 2 weeks in, it was clear I wasn't going to hit it. I know now that the acoustics market is very consolidated and the amount of people that I can actually approach is not very big. And my mentor in I-Core program, after those 2 weeks, said, you're not putting in enough effort, you're clearly not interested, and you should just drop out, figure out what you want to do, and then maybe do this later. That hurt. At the same time, I was introduced to a friend who had a friend and a small team interested in kind of joining an early stage startup. They were part of the MIT network. And I was kind of doing the founder matching, dating aspect to try to reduce some of this burden that I was really stressed out about, trying to find where to go and what to do. Now, ultimately, it didn't work out. I think they had different mindsets about what active surfaces should have been. Ramp-up timelines were aggressive for my taste and what I thought was accomplishable with a new semiconductor-based technology. And it was clear they didn't really value engineering and wanted to place a high focus on business development, which also I didn't really like. So I told them that we needed to go our separate ways. I'd find out something else to do or do this on my own as a sole founder. And that group ended up forming a separate company within a few days and attempted to license the MIT patents out from under me in order to pursue something without me involved. And I like this story because that is why Active Surfaces is founded on July 11th. It wasn't this culmination of people. It wasn't this culmination of ideas. There's nothing, bountiful about it. Active Surfaces got founded July 11th and has the name Active Surfaces because it was the least aggressive name. It was free with Delaware C filings, and we needed a company fast to start trying to not have the license ripped out away from us. Now, ultimately, this got solved very quickly. At the time, it was horrible. I felt like the company was going to die before it even started. But you have to remember about a month later, I met Shiv, and about 3 months after that, we started winning our prize monies. And so the company is still fine. Again, we're up at 10 people now. But my takeaways here, kind of in these early days, that I share with you is that with regards to I-Core and kind of this idea around customer discovery, most startup programs kind of lean on a method taught by Steve Blank at Stanford, which is kind of the lean startup model in and around agile development. And it's really good. It works for many, many startups. It works for getting sort of that early sort of business direction. It is adopted by just about every program. So it's adopted by NSF I-Core, the SBIR, the Engine Blueprints program does it too. Anytime you see a program that gives you a business model canvas, it almost certainly originated from Steve Blank. Lean startups rely on direct customer interviews. That's the first thing you do. You start asking about value, try to get value of the thing that you'd eventually sell. With deep tech, the thing I've learned going through this now 4 years in is that this is actually the wrong question. You should not be this early on asking customers for feedback on a thing that doesn't exist. You should be asking, if this thing does exist, how does it change consumer behavior? Now, of course, that still relies on knowing the market and talking to people, but asking what their actual value is to pay is kind of useless. And similarly, in those early days, especially when I was looking for a co-founder, I was asking the wrong question. I was asking for someone to spread the workload with me. I was looking for operators, people who knew things like I didn't, like taxes, or how to assess different sort of top-down market models. And that was wrong because I shouldn't have been searching for someone to take the load off me. I should have been asking, who can I rely on to push the vision forward? And ultimately, that ended up being the more successful way to find a co-founder. Again, I met Shiv, and we've done great together since then. Second thing I want to share with you is that, and again, if you know us, we ended up winning MIT 100K in 2023, but we bombed at the Rice Business Plan competition 1 day before. So set the scene again. We're now 2 people in the company. We're in a phase where we're established, we're papered, and we're trying to figure out and generate a lot of excitement around the motivation and the idea. This was actually Shiv's idea. This was not mine, so I give him all the credit. And ultimately, he was right, is to sort of market yourselves and market the team as early as possible. So we were trying to build this momentum. We were applying to just about everything we could, but we couldn't actually do anything operationally. We had no money. I was not taking a salary at the time. Shiv was still in school. And we were doing all of this to kind of find investors and gain some traction. So what ended up happening? So success is objective. I guess we did officially win something, although it was a minor prize. It was on the Sustainable Investment Prize. The reality is that the major prizes were in the multi-millions of dollars. I think upwards of like 3 to 4 million were actually given out at this competition. Everybody who won was a SaaS company or a fintech company. And this was a big letdown for us because Houston, the center of oil, is known as the city of energy. And we thought that being an energy-based kind of play with regards to our commercial direction would actually resonate here. And it didn't. The judges were extremely judgmental about our timelines to development, our technology readiness levels. They were mostly angel groups who wanted to give out kind of small money and get really high returns. And it was just a really big letdown at the end of the day. Right after that, that photo was taken, we spent 12 hours in the Houston airport on a delayed flight. We got into Boston, I think, like 2 a.m. I live up here in Salem, Massachusetts, so I didn't get home till 3 a.m. And the MIT 100K, I think we had to be there like 11 or 12, something like that, for pre-practice before the event actually started. Now, the end result to this is that we actually won. We swept house. We had both the audience award and won the full thing. Very proud of that. I think it was a very key milestone in our development. But a big takeaway here for me as I move forward is that in the early stages of being a startup, you have lots and lots of ups and downs. It can get very mentally exhausting. 1 week you're on a high, the next week you think the company's going to go under, and it's this cyclic, rise and fall where you don't really know where you're going to land. And it takes a lot of mental perseverance. Something I still kind of remind myself of, that if things are bad today, they will be better tomorrow, and I shouldn't get myself down. But a quote that I really resonate with through this is that even if the company does poorly, my career will actually be fine. The path of going through this is more important than the overall outcome in terms of the entire industry. Now, through this, again, we were successful. That Rice business plan was kind of a lull in an otherwise relatively successful year for us. We operated out of Greentown Labs. We actually still do to a minor extent. We did relatively well at Clean Tech Open, and we're part of a number of smaller, like Excel and the Swiss Next Climate Collider, Venture for Climate Tech, and now we're still in third derivative. It's an 18-month program. So overall, we did really well, and I'm ultimately really proud of where we came through on that year. Getting to the growth stage, and this is kind of more just a funny story for me, which we're still in, by the way. We closed our financing earlier this year. We've been building ever since. We're actually still hiring, so I'm just going to make that as my first plug of that. This was our lab about 2 months ago. I think that 1 week we had the first of many shipments come in, and the whole thing looked like a mess. And the reality is that some of the things again, the compressed dry air system has been one of the biggest pains in my ass for about 6 months now. We're a chemistry company, material science company, manufacturing company, however you want to describe it. And it was clear to us very, very early on that we needed nitrogen and clean dry air in order to support our entire kind of tool set. We started this even before we closed financing. I'm kind of speccing this out. Nitrogen is relatively easy to install if you ever have to do it. You mostly just go to Airgas and get permitting. It takes a long period of time to do that. But for us, the clean dry air was actually unique. We spec'd it out pretty differently to how most people would. They had very specific requirements, and I would consider it a non-standard installation, kind of due to our specific needs. And installing it has been an absolute nightmare. It took about 2 months to pick it out. I think I rotated through like 3 or 4 consultants, trying to estimate what we needed and why, and sort of pick out something, despite the fact that we didn't have a good idea of everything we'd eventually build. When you're an early stage startup and you don't have credit, ordering something of that size can be a hassle too. So we ordered it, had to prepay for everything, even though delivery and timelines, I think, took about 2.5 months. When we finally got it, we moved it in and wired it. We don't have a loading dock, so that was a hassle. And one of the legs actually got damaged kind of in transit. Our initial electrician wired it wrong. Then our machine installer, who was supposed to plumb it into our CDA line, plumbed it wrong. Then went back and rewired it wrong. And it's been this kind of cyclic issue. And the last fun thing is that even when it got in and it was finally plumbed right and finally wired right, now it overheats based on where it is. And so we need to install kind of direct exhaust to this machine. And it's safe to say that my entire team, probably all 15 of us at some point, has put time and effort into contributing some way that this compressor gets in to our lab. Now, I think it's relevant in this story to give kind of a brief history of compressed dry air. Compressed air was first used in industrial settings in the 1820s. The first portable ones were used in 1857. Kind of that photo there shows what they looked like. They actually predate electric tools. So they were first kind of industrial hand tools used in industry. And today, clean dry air is sometimes referred to as the fourth utility. So you'd think this would be easy. It was not. And my takeaway to this is that building something unique and different, even if it's a non-standard installation of a compressor, takes a lot of time. And the things that can take the longest are not necessarily the most exciting. It's not us sitting down and building solar cells or building MEMS devices. For us, that's actually kind of easy. It's these kind of non-standard things where we rely on others that take the longest. And the reality is that the quality of people that you surround yourself with, how willing they are to actually solve this problem and roll up their sleeves, how much they actually believe in what the company is trying to really pursue and build are the absolute most important things to success. And I'm really glad that we surrounded ourselves with the right people, because otherwise this compressor would never have gone in. So in summary, to kind of conclude my talk, and sort of sum it up into 3 bullet points from when I first presented in 2020 to now. Building things requires a few different key things, but first and foremost, you need to ask the right questions about what you're building and why. You need to believe in yourself on how to actually do it, and you need to find people and surround them who will do the same. And my last plug on this, we're still hiring. So if you know a materials chemist or someone with roll-to-roll experience, please send them my way to Shrees or Vladimir. They'll definitely get you in contact with me for this. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to Vladimir and take any questions that were sent through the talk to the crowd.
Richard, thank you very, very much. It is awesome to hear the journey. And I've seen many of those ups and downs as you indeed progressed from one stage to the next. Your perseverance is remarkable, and I'm glad it yielded the active services where it is right now. If you have questions for Richard, there are really three ways that you can indeed submit them. One of them is the Q&A button that you see on the bottom of the screen. Another version would be by sending it through a chat. Or lastly, simply raise your hand and we'll recognize and call upon you, and we can then have you ask the question verbally to Richard. So let me open the floor for any questions that might be of interest. I see Jerson Peralta has raised his hand. If you would like to unmute yourself and just ask the question. Jerson?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Seems, thank you very much. Seems that had my mic off. Thank you very much, Richard, for the talk. It is amazing and inspiring, actually. I would like to know, one of the things I wonder every time I think about starting myself with a company is which kind of investment did you have at the beginning, at the early times, and how did you face that time that it was probably a little bit with a high uncertainty and instability from your side?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll answer in two ways. I'll directly answer you. So the earliest money that we got in was venture capital. So we pretty much immediately went as a company to venture capital. That being said, that's not a very common route. I would say everybody's journey is different, and my advice is usually to look at your own industry and see kind of how people are progressing with that. Yeah, there's lots of reasons why we went to VC first. I don't know if I have time to really list them all. I think the reality, though, is like there is always going to be that early point where it's just going to be you kind of self-financing it, pushing it forward. For me, that lasted about 6 months before we kind of finally got our first money in. Some of it grant winnings and pitch competitions, and then, like I said, the first money in was actually venture capital in a very, very small, safe note.
A couple of questions maybe to continue on that from the Q&A. What would you have done differently to better facilitate an investment more quickly? And added to that, do you still feel that the VC community is biased against hard tech?
These are good questions. I feel like I could spend all day on them. I think, I mean, looking back on it, I wish we didn't spend so much time with investors we knew were the wrong fit. I think it wasted a decent chunk of time. I think we would have been a little bit earlier to kind of where we are now. You know, when you do, so like I talked kind of about like founder matching in this talk, but the reality is you need to do it too with venture capital. Like putting the right people around you is incredibly important. We've been very lucky where we've had, you know, not only the right people, but we kind of got the choice of it. Not everybody really has that. But yeah, there was a lot of times I think we kind of were in the VC, like looking around the VC market, and I think we just spent too much time exploring and not really just like locking down the people we knew we wanted. In terms of bias, yes and no. I don't think the bias is against hard tech specifically. I think the bias is against the timeline of hard tech or deep tech. So there's distinctions now between those two words. I think a lot of investors really handle long timelines or whatnot. And the way that I kind of describe it, because most people don't really understand how this works, is VCs. There's the general partners, which are like operational, and then they actually have their own investors. So they're actually more like middlemen, and they actually also kind of act like startups. And so a fund is raised and then usually progresses through like a 3-year timeline before like they have to fundraise again for another fund if they're going to continue to kind of operate. And so what that places, it places pressure kind of on startups to really exit or show growth within those timelines so that they actually can keep their jobs to their own investors. And so that's, I think, where the bias comes in, is that hard tech is just really difficult to kind of grow on those timescales. And I think that's where really the bias comes in.
A question that follows, because people are excited about active surfaces, is about your next hiring at your team. Are you interested in growing your team with PhD students at this stage or other talent?
So I'll go back to the team slide right now. We hire on kind of two main. So our hiring process for these guys was actually kind of long, and the reason why is because we weren't hiring on direct like a research experience. I know a lot of like our competitors kind of do that. They look at publications. We don't actually care too heavily about publication history with our hiring. We care about kind of foundational knowledge, willingness to learn, and excitement to the end goal. Everyone on our tech team, Jeremiah, Austin, Matt, well, not Jay, I guess, but he has a relatively long amount of time in lab. And then Elise are all PhDs. So Jeremiah's late stage career, I mean, got his PhD from UConn, but it's not really relevant anymore. Austin's from Rice, Matt's from Pitt, Elise is from Stanford. So the materials engineer position that we do have open right now on our site, that's mostly for an early career PhD graduate. The other one, the role, we kind of flip-flop. It hasn't been officially posted yet, but it's probably going to be more dependent on the type of applicant we get rather than
another question.
Level, I guess.
Yeah. Another question is just the way you're thinking about finding that appropriate VC. The question is, what kind of investor and people would you suggest looking for, especially keeping a balance between the trust and technology understanding? What kind of insights you might have on that?
Trust is the most important thing. I think a lot of the reason why we fundraised the way we did is because of the trust built through personal relationships prior to investment. You know, maybe another way to phrase it on kind of how to think about this and the way I think about it a lot is like, okay, someone, and it's a single person or two people, is going to eventually make the decision that they're going to give you either 5 figures or 6 figures. What in your own mind would you want to see to like validate that among yourself? And like some of it is technical competence, and then some of it is like just trust that this person's not going to screw with you. And that second part is the hardest one. Technical competence is metrics, and trust is personal relationships.
Yeah. I can't agree with you more. I see Alvin Tan raised his hand. Do you mind unmuting yourself and asking a question?
Hi, Richard. This is Alvin calling from Singapore.
Hi, Alvin.
Good to see you. Thank
Yeah.
you for your sharing. So you had a really interesting quote there. It went something along like, even if the company doesn't do well your career will be fine. I thought that was really interesting and kind of paradoxical. So I wonder if you would like to elaborate more on that.
Yeah. So it's kind of paraphrased from a conversation I had with Mitchell from InchFab at one point. And I've talked to other founders about it too, especially when like their company has gone under in some way, shape, or form, and like what that transition was between first company and second company if they do that, or first company in some other role. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good way to like single describe that. It's just kind of something that you see more and more is that like, okay, if the company fails itself, right, and doesn't do well and we don't create market value and we don't scale up, you know, all the skills that I would have learned throughout the way of managing a team, you know, doing books, doing taxes, doing SEC filings, doing tech development, leading a group, all those things are translatable to something else. Maybe not necessarily solar, if there are no other solar companies interested, but definitely is useful advice to someone new who wants to come along and try something else in the market. You know, you learn a lot of things that are not, I guess, specific to your own industry, and those things are just as valuable for your personal career growth as is the company's, I guess, is the way to think about it. So there's a lot of people try to isolate this, I guess is another way to say it. Like there's your personal career growth and then there's the company's growth. And like you have to separate those two out to kind of prevent, I guess, the low days from being as low as they are, because like your personal career is not really going to be affected when the company itself has a negative day.
That's
Richard,
great perspective. Thank you for sharing.
Alvin, thank you so much for asking. I think that is a fantastic moment to unfortunately have to stop this nano exploration seminar. Richard, thank you. Thanks a ton for being frank, sharing your journey. It is many ups and downs that have led you to the present state of being way up from where you started.
Thank you, Badr.
Congratulations on launching Active Surfaces and building it to where it is. And, you know, if you don't mind, 4 years from now, we'll call you again when Active Surfaces is reaching million users and changing the world, just to give us yet another seminar on what success of building a basic idea can grow into. So with that, I will conclude this seminar. I would like to also tell you that this is the last one for the academic year, 23-24. We look forward to seeing many of you back starting in September. We'll reinitiate these. Thank you very much for being here today. All the best.